The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical hymn as Danielle Ross pushed through the heavy double doors of Savannah High School's auditorium. 6 hours on her feet at the VA clinic. 12 more before tomorrow's shift. Her scrub still carried the antiseptic smell of the morning, layered now with her own exhaustion. She was late, not dramatically late, but the kind of late that meant the back row, the shadows, the place where people like her belonged. The auditorium swallowed her like a mouth. Rows of graduates sat rigid in royal blue caps and gowns, their parents filling every other seat in a landscape of expensive fabrics and watches that cost more than Danielle's monthly rent. She counted the rows without thinking, a habit from 16 combat deployments. 16 rows. 7 exits. 2 emergency doors on the stage left. The exits were always the first thing she measured anymore. Emma sat third from the front, spine straight, hands folded on her lap in that careful way she had. Her daughter didn't move, didn't look back, but Danielle knew she was aware of every second her mother wasn't in that room. Some things didn't need confirmation. They lived in the blood. Danielle's left hand moved to her jacket. Not obvious. Just a small shift, fingers finding the torn lining where she'd sewn it 6 years ago, the faded 1st Marine Division patch, bleached and soft from being touched too many times. The Marines. Sanjin. All of it was in that patch. All the versions of herself she'd buried under scrubs and night shifts and the careful performance of being ordinary. Her fingers traced its edge once, twice, 3 times. A combat drill. A rosary. A reminder. The patch pressed against her ribs with each breath. Close enough to feel like armor. Close enough that no one would ever find it. The stage lights bent and swayed as bodies moved across the platform. The school principal stood center stage like a man who'd never questioned his right to be anywhere. Dr. Marcus Sterling, the name alone seemed to carry weight and lineage, the kind of surname that opened doors in Savannah that people like Danielle were meant to keep clean. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored in that effortless way that only money and inherited confidence could manage. The kind of suit that cost more than her car. His eyes moved across the audience in lazy sweeps, cataloging, measuring, assessing the inventory of his domain. The new athletic wing stood visible through the side windows, that had been Sterling's project, his trophy. Funded by families whose children wore Italian leather and summer internships like medals. Danielle had seen him in the parking lot once, 3 months ago, standing between 2 men in golf shirts that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. They'd laughed at something he said, the kind of laugh that came from deep, unshakable certainty that the world was arranged exactly as it should be. Then his eyes found her. It wasn't the kind of finding that meant recognition. It was the kind that meant observation. The way a naturalist notices a new bird species, cataloging the anomaly, noting it in the mental ledger of things that didn't quite belong. Her scrubs. The worn fabric of her jacket. The way she stood alone, back row, weight shifted to her right leg out of reflex and old injury. The slight tightening around his mouth. The micropause in his sweep of the room. He saw tired eyes and hospital scrubs creased from a double shift. He saw a woman who'd been driving through the rain at 6:24 a.m. to reach the VA clinic by 7, who'd stayed 3 hours past her shift because Marcus Chen in the prosthetics clinic had thrown a blood clot into his lung and someone needed to sit with him while the doctors decided whether his remaining years would be lived in a hospital bed. He saw scrubs still damp at the collar from helping a patient vomit. He saw someone whose presence at this ceremony was an inconvenience, a scheduling error, a note in someone's calendar that should have been left unchecked. What he didn't see was the way her hand stayed perfectly still despite the trembling in her chest, that particular discipline that came from learning to control her body's responses when panic could kill people around her. The way she counted breaths like a combat drill, inhale for 4, hold for 6, exhale for 8. The way her eyes had already mapped every exit, every sightline, every person who might become an obstacle. The precise manner in which she'd positioned her body so that she could move from stillness to action in less than 2 seconds if needed. He didn't see the faded unit patch under her torn jacket lining, invisible unless someone tore the fabric open and looked directly for what had been sewn into the body of her coat like shrapnel in skin. He didn't see the 1st Marine Division emblem, the symbol that meant she'd stood in Sanjin Valley with dust in her teeth and blood on her hands, that she'd held dying Marines in the dark while helicopters circled overhead looking for places to land that wouldn't expose the LZ to fire. He didn't see that she'd been called Valkyrie. Danielle felt her daughter's eyes search the back of the auditorium. Emma's gaze swept left, then right, looking for the one face that mattered. There. Back corner. Her mother. Finally. Emma's shoulders dropped half an inch, imperceptible to anyone else, but Danielle saw it. The relief. The knowledge that whatever happened next, she wasn't alone. That her mother had come despite the double shift, despite the exhaustion that made her own hands ache at the knuckles, despite the fact that she probably hadn't eaten anything but coffee since 5 a.m. Emma's eyes found Danielle's across the distance of the auditorium. Just for a moment. Just enough. Danielle nodded. The smallest movement. Enough. Sterling moved to the microphone. He touched it like it was a tool he'd been born knowing how to use. The feedback wheeze died down, and the ambient noise of the auditorium, parents settling, phones being silenced, the rustle of program papers, seemed to pause in anticipation. He was good at this. The command of a room. The certainty that every word from his mouth was worth hearing. This was a man who'd been told his entire life that he was exactly where he belonged. His eyes swept the audience again. They caught on Danielle once more. Held there. Long enough that she felt the weight of it, long enough that she knew this moment was going to be about more than a graduation ceremony. The patch under her jacket seemed to grow heavier against her ribs. Her fingers moved to touch it again, a small motion hidden by her jacket's fold. The Marines. Sanjin. 16 deployments. 47 lives saved under fire. And now a high school gymnasium in the rain-soaked morning of her daughter's graduation, standing in the back in scrubs she hadn't even had time to change out of, watching Principal Dr. Marcus Sterling prepare to say something that would change the trajectory of this entire day. His jaw moved. The microphone live. His voice filled the auditorium with the kind of smooth, practiced confidence that had probably never been questioned. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't what made Danielle's breath catch at precisely the moment Emma turned back to face the stage, back row, front row, missing the moment when Sterling's eyes lingered one final time on the woman in the nurse's scrubs standing alone in the back, and something cold and dismissive settled in the corner of his mouth like he'd just tasted something bitter. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then he leaned into the microphone, and everything changed. The microphone squealed. Dr. Marcus Sterling adjusted it with deliberate care, his tailored charcoal suit catching the auditorium lights like armor plate. He scanned the crowd, rows of parents in designer labels, leather shoes worth more than a month's nurse's salary, the kind of posture that came from generations of being told they belonged in rooms like this. His gaze found Danielle at the back in her faded VA clinic scrubs, and something flickered across his face. Not recognition. Contempt. Well, Sterling said, his voice dropping into theatrical concern, we are honored that even our service workers could take time from their busy schedules to attend today. He lingered on the words like he was tasting something bitter. The support staff. The essential workers. The auditorium filled with polite laughter, the kind that rippled through expensive blazers and pearls, knowing and warm. A woman 3 seats from Danielle in a cream Chanel suit leaned toward her companion. At least she showed up, she whispered, loud enough to be heard. The companion smiled. Sterling continued, his smile widening into something that looked nothing like kindness. I suppose not everyone can afford to take the afternoon off from real careers to, shall we say, change into proper attire. He gestured vaguely at Danielle. Standards. We do maintain standards here at Savannah High. Excellence. Legacy. The kind of professional presentation that reflects well on our institution. More laughter. More knowing glances. Danielle's jaw didn't move. Her hands didn't shake. But she felt Emma's eyes searching for her across the auditorium, 3 rows down, left side, the white graduation gown making her look impossibly young and impossibly terrified. Emma's face had gone the color of wet concrete. Sterling noticed. He tilted his head, studying Danielle like an entomologist examining an insect on a pin. Ms. Ross, it is Ms. Ross, correct. No doctor before that name. His tone suggested the answer was both obvious and pitiful. Perhaps next year you'll find time to present yourself appropriately for your daughter's achievements. We do have standards. He turned back to his notes, already moving on, already won. The audience shifted, the moment passing, the pecking order re-established. That was when Danielle took one slow breath. For counting. She met his eyes. Not defiant. Not angry. Just present. Solid as concrete. My daughter worked harder than anyone in that graduating class, sir, that's all that matters to me today. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It simply existed in the space between them like a challenge that didn't need to be loud to be heard. The auditorium stilled. Sterling's expression froze. For exactly 2 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The fluorescent panels above hummed their steady mechanical drone. Then one tear escaped Danielle's left eye. She didn't cry. Crying would have been something. This was different, a single tear that she wiped away with her thumb while maintaining absolute eye contact, while keeping her shoulders straight, while not giving him the satisfaction of breaking. It was restraint that looked like strength. It was the kind of composure that made Sterling's jaw tighten, that made the wealthy parents lean back in their seats, that made something shift in the room's balance even though nobody could name what. Sterling recovered first. His smile returned, sharper now, edged. How touching. Emma Ross, please stand. His voice had taken on a new quality, the voice of someone who'd been challenged and intended to demonstrate the cost. Emma rose slowly, her hands trembling, her graduation gown shaking as she stepped into the aisle. Your mother's dedication is admirable, I suppose, but disrupting this ceremony with family drama simply won't be tolerated. We have a process here. We have decorum. He snapped his fingers toward the back of the auditorium. Security. Escort Ms. Ross from the building. Immediately. 2 guards in navy blazers began moving toward Danielle like she was a threat they'd been waiting permission to handle. As for you, Emma, you will receive your diploma by mail. A formal disciplinary process will follow. Disruptive family influences end here. That is my final word on the matter. He turned away from both of them, dismissing them completely, already gesturing to the next name on his list. Let's continue with our ceremony. Marcus Chen, please approach the stage. But that wasn't the worst part. As the guards flanked Danielle, one on each side, their hands reaching for her elbows, a sound cut through the auditorium like a gunshot. Not a gunshot. Something worse. A body hitting hardwood at terminal velocity. A thud that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Mr. Patterson, the 73-year-old history teacher, beloved by 3 generations of Savannah students, the veteran who'd taught American history for 42 years, collapsed forward out of his chair in the front row like a marionette with cut strings. His wife screamed his name. The woman sitting next to him gasped and lurched backward. Parents scattered like someone had pulled a fire alarm. Patterson's face was already turning blue-gray. His chest, motionless. Sterling froze at the microphone. The guard stopped moving. Emma stopped breathing. For 3 seconds, the auditorium existed in a state of shocked suspension. Then Sterling's voice cracked. Someone call 911. Now! He was fumbling for his phone, his practiced composure shattering like old glass. Is there a doctor present? A doctor? Anyone? He waved uselessly at the crowd. We need somebody do something. Please. Call 911. I already called. I think I called. His hand shook. His face was draining color. He'd spent so long perfecting the illusion of control that he had no muscle memory for actual crisis. He shouted contradictory orders, lay him flat. No, turn him on his side, isn't that better for the airway? Where are the paramedics? Why aren't they here yet? Danielle watched all of it happen in the space of 4 heartbeats. She watched Patterson's lips turn darker blue. She watched the guards' grips on her elbows loosen as they turned toward the collapse. She counted, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, for Mississippi, Patterson's last breath. She felt the tension in the room spike and transform into something primal. Panic. Helplessness. Death walking toward them at the speed of cellular anoxia. She broke free. Not violently. Just deliberately. The guards were already turning, already distracted, already releasing her to move toward the chaos. She stepped forward and dropped to her knees beside Patterson, muscle memory taking over. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this exact thing 447 times before in places where screaming ambulances didn't exist. She ripped open his dress shirt. The buttons scattered across the hardwood like dice. She pressed her ear to his chest. No breath sounds. She felt for the trachea, found the deviation. Distended neck veins. Classic presentation. Tension pneumothorax. The collapsed lung was compressing his vena cava, cutting off blood flow to his heart. 30 seconds until brain damage. 60 until cardiac arrest. She pulled a pen from her scrubs pocket, a cheap blue Bic, the kind that cost 99 cents, and yanked off the cap with her teeth. She found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, felt the landmarks with her fingertips. Years of practice made her hands steady as surgical instruments. She pressed the hollow barrel against his chest and drove it between his ribs with the heel of her other hand. The resistance gave way. There was a hiss, the sound of air escaping under pressure, the sound of pneumothorax decompressing, the sound of a man being pulled back from the edge. Patterson's chest wall relaxed. His color shifted from blue to gray to pale pink. Danielle began compressions. One hand on top of the other. Sternum. Full depth. Push hard, push fast, no mercy. The auditorium had gone so silent you could hear the hiss of the air conditioning and the distant wail of an ambulance getting closer. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Patterson's fingers twitched. His eyes began to flutter. By the time the paramedics arrived 6 minutes later, by the time they burst through the gymnasium doors with a stretcher and oxygen and equipment that hummed with expensive capability, Patterson was breathing on his own. Conscious. Squeezing his wife's hand. Her name was Carol. She was saying it over and over. Patterson. Patterson. You're back. You're back. Sterling stood frozen at the podium. His face had gone the color of old paper. His phone was still in his hand. His mouth was open but nothing came out. He'd just watched a woman in hospital scrubs, the service worker he'd mocked 5 minutes earlier, perform a procedure that his state-of-the-art auditorium couldn't afford to lose. She'd just saved a life while he'd been frantically making useless phone calls. She'd just demonstrated something he'd spent his entire career trying to hide, that expertise and value had nothing to do with the suit you wore or the last name on your diploma. Danielle wiped Patterson's blood off her hands on her scrubs and stood. The guards didn't try to touch her again. Danielle wiped Patterson's blood off her hands on her scrubs and stood. The guards didn't try to touch her again. The paramedics wheeled Patterson toward the exit, his wife jogging alongside the gurney, one hand gripping his shoulder. Thank you, she sobbed toward Danielle, tears streaming down her face. You saved him. You saved my husband. Patterson's eyes were open now, color returning to his lips as oxygen fed through the cannula. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. The needle decompression had worked exactly as it should, air hissing out of the pleural space, pressure releasing, his lungs finally able to inflate. But nobody was looking at Patterson anymore. The local news crew that had come to cover the graduation ceremony had caught everything on camera. Every second of it. Danielle dropping to her knees. Her hands moving with the kind of precision that didn't match a woman in worn scrubs. The pen in Patterson's chest cavity between the second and third ribs. The clinical efficiency. The confidence of someone who had done this before. Many times before. Parents throughout the auditorium were pointing. Whispers rippled like current through water. One mother leaned toward her husband. "Did you see what she just did?" Another father's jaw hung slightly open. A woman in the third row was filming with her phone, capturing the final moments as the paramedics loaded Patterson onto the stretcher. Emma tried to push through the crowd toward her mother, but Sterling materialized in her path, not physically blocking her, but his presence enough to stop her momentum. His hand was already at his ear, phone pressed against the side of his face. His eyes had gone flat and cold, the expression of a man whose perfect afternoon had just been poisoned by the unexpected. He turned slightly away from the crowd, his voice dropping to a controlled whisper that somehow carried across the noise. "Richard, it's Marcus. We have a liability situation. A nurse just performed an unauthorized invasive procedure on school property. Yes, I'm aware of the circumstances. Yes, I understand Patterson's condition improved. That's actually worse, legally speaking." A pause. "Richard, she used a pen. And her car keys. On school grounds. During a graduation ceremony with 200 witnesses. Our insurance policy explicitly prohibits non-medical personnel from administering emergency procedures. Yes, I need her banned immediately. And I need documentation that we followed protocol. That we didn't consent to her actions and didn't encourage them." Danielle was already moving toward the exit, but Sterling's voice cut through the auditorium again. He lowered the phone and turned back to the crowd, his hand rising in a gesture that was almost paternal. The microphone crackled softly as he gripped it. "Ladies and gentlemen, while we're grateful Mr. Patterson is stable, I want to address what just occurred." His voice had shifted into something smoother, more careful. The tone of a man who had just recalibrated his position. "Unauthorized medical procedures on school grounds violate our insurance policies and state regulations. While Ms. Ross's intentions were clearly good, we have a responsibility to our community to ensure that only licensed personnel," he placed emphasis on the word like a judge hammering a gavel, "administer emergency care. It's a matter of liability. And protocol." A father in an expensive suit called out, "Lawsuit." "That's lawsuit territory right there." Sterling nodded in agreement, as if this man had just articulated something profound. Other parents murmured approval. The whispers shifted. No longer amazement at what she'd done. Concern about insurance. Worry about legal exposure. Sterling had reframed the entire moment in the span of 30 seconds. "As a result of this incident, I've made the following decision." Sterling's voice took on the cadence of someone making an executive decision, someone accustomed to having his authority respected. "Ms. Ross is hereby banned from school property pending investigation. Emma Ross, your diploma will be mailed to you once your mother signs a liability waiver acknowledging the incident and agreeing to our terms." His eyes moved to Emma, and there was something almost sympathetic in his expression, the expression of someone who had to do something difficult but necessary. "I know this is disappointing. But rules exist to protect everyone." Emma's face had gone white. She looked at her mother, then back at Sterling, then at the crowd. No one was meeting her eyes except Danielle, who had stopped moving. She stood absolutely still, her jaw set, her eyes never leaving Sterling's face. The phone was already back at his ear. Sterling had turned toward the side exit, his second call already connecting. This time his voice was different, more casual, the tone of one college roommate calling another, though there was an edge underneath it that hadn't been there before. "Dr. Chen?" "Marcus Sterling from Savannah High. Listen, I hate to call with bad news, but one of your VA clinic nurses just created a serious incident at our graduation ceremony. Yes, I'm aware Sacred Heart has a contract with the VA system. That's actually why I'm calling." He paused, listening. "One of her employees performed an unauthorized invasive procedure on school grounds. Used a pen and car keys to perform what appeared to be emergency surgery. In front of 200 witnesses. Our insurance company is already reviewing the liability implications, and I wanted to give you a heads up before this becomes a public relations issue. I'll send you documentation. The crowd's energy had shifted completely now. The heroic narrative was dissolving into something murkier. Liability. Scope of practice. Unauthorized procedures. The language of risk management and legal protection. Danielle reached the back doors. Her hand was on the push bar when her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it immediately. She pushed through into the hallway, where the air was suddenly colder, the fluorescent lights overhead humming their monotonous electric hymn. Only when the doors swung closed behind her did she pull the phone from her scrub pocket. The message was from her shift supervisor at Sacred Heart, a woman named Keisha who'd always been fair and direct. Don't come in Monday. Dr. Chen wants to meet first. No question mark. No explanation. Just the simple statement of fact that her employment, which she'd held for 4 years, which had allowed her to keep a roof over her daughter's head and food on their table, was now hanging by a thread. She could see the dominoes falling in her mind with the clarity of someone who had been forced to develop contingency plans for every possible outcome. A phone call from Sterling to Caldwell. Another call to a hospital director. A meeting scheduled. Paperwork filed. The machinery of institutional power grinding into motion. She had saved a man's life. The room had seen it. The cameras had captured it. And somewhere in the gap between heroic action and legal liability, she had become a problem that needed solving. Danielle stood in the hallway for exactly 15 seconds, her hands at her sides, her breathing controlled. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. One foot in front of the other. Steady. Deliberate. The same way she had walked out of Sanjan Valley 9 years ago. The same way she had learned to walk through everything that came after. Outside, the afternoon sun was harsh and bright. The parking lot stretched before her in neat rows of expensive cars. Parents were beginning to emerge from the auditorium, their conversations animated, most of them completely unaware that the story had already shifted. That the heroic nurse had become the cautionary tale. That the system, once it decided you were a liability, would move with the precision of a predator that had already calculated the kill. Her car was in the back row, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had never done anything remarkable and never would. She walked toward it, her scrub still stained with Patterson's blood. The patch inside her jacket felt heavier than it had that morning. The weight of secrets. The weight of a life lived in the margins, careful not to be seen, careful not to matter too much, careful not to break protocol or threaten the hierarchy that kept everything in place. She had just violated every rule of her chosen invisibility. She had stepped out of the background. She had saved someone's life with the kind of efficiency and confidence that made administrators nervous. And she was about to pay for it. But Patterson would live. That was the only equation that mattered. That was the only variable she had been willing to solve for. Everything else was just consequences. Webb's hands trembled as he dialed, not from guilt but from fury at being made irrelevant. The intercom had carried her voice to every parent in that auditorium, steady, competent, alive with the kind of authority money couldn't buy. He sat in his office overlooking the football field, rain beginning to hammer the windows, and punched Richard Caldwell's number with the precision of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Richard, Marcus Sterling. We have a situation. Webb's voice came out smooth as aged whiskey, controlled. A clinic employee violated school protocol during the graduation ceremony. Unauthorized medical procedures. Could have killed Patterson instead of helped him. I need this documented and official. Caldwell's response was predictable, cautious but cooperative. They'd roomed together at Yale. Caldwell owed him 3 favors minimum. What exactly happened, Marcus? She performed a needle decompression. That's a surgical intervention. No physician present, no hospital consent, no liability waivers. If something had gone wrong, if Patterson had died, this school would be defending a wrongful death lawsuit. Webb paused, letting the legal threat hang like a blade. I'm filing a formal complaint about unauthorized practice of medicine. I need you to ban her from school property permanently. Official letter, archived in her employment file. The silence on the line lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Caldwell asked, "The nurse, what's her name?" "Danielle Ross. Works at Sacred Heart's VA clinic." Another pause. Webb could hear Caldwell's fingers moving across a keyboard. Board presidents always had resources. Always had reach. "I'll draft the letter today." "You want it hand-delivered or official mail?" "Hand-delivered by end of business. I want her to know the weight of what she's done." Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And Richard?" "Call Dr. Chen at Sacred Heart. Tell him this was a scope of practice violation. Suggest the VA might not want an employee who makes independent medical decisions outside her authorization." It wasn't a request. It was instruction disguised as conversation. Caldwell understood. "That's pushing it, Marcus. If she pushes back." "She won't. Women like her don't push back. They fold." Webb glanced at his reflection in the dark window, silver-haired, posture perfect, the bearing of a man who'd never been denied. "Call Chen. Frame it as a courtesy. Professional concern for hospital liability." The call to Chen took 8 minutes. Webb didn't listen, he didn't need to. The script was identical. The story would be leaked, digested, weaponized. By morning, Sacred Heart's administrative team would be calculating risk versus protocol. By afternoon, Danielle Ross would be terminated. Webb had built Savannah High's reputation on exclusion dressed up as excellence. Families paid $60,000 annually for tuition because his school guaranteed that their children would graduate alongside the right people, meaning people like them. A nurse in scrubs performing emergency medicine in front of witnesses was a virus. Competence from the unexpected source was a threat to the entire hierarchy. He returned to his emails, typed the official ban notice himself, and approved the formal letter of complaint. The rain intensified outside, sheets of water that looked like applause, and Webb felt the pleasant weight of control settling back into place. She'd been escorted from the premises by security. She'd been humiliated in front of her daughter. Now she'd be unemployable. Perfect. 2 hours later, Danielle stood at the Riverside bus stop on Victory Drive, rain soaking through her scrubs, a cardboard box balanced against her hip. The box held everything her 12 years at Sacred Heart had accumulated, a cracked ceramic mug that Emma had painted in 3rd grade, now faded pink with poorly drawn letters spelling "World's Best Mom." A dying succulent from her desk that she'd kept in the corner by the for supplies, its leaves paper-thin and brittle. A paperback copy of a medical journal she'd been meaning to finish. And beneath everything, wrapped in an old hospital ID badge that had expired 6 years ago, the photograph. She pulled it out, ignoring the rain that was already warping the cheap cardboard frame. 8 Marines in desert fatigue stood against a concrete wall at Forward Operating Base Sanjin, faces dusty and exhausted beyond measure. Third from the left was Captain James Rivera, 29 years old, with eyes exactly like the young Marine who'd appeared at the school yesterday. No. Not yesterday. Today was different now. Time had fractured into before the bus stop and after. Rivera had been Emma's older brother's best friend since elementary school. He'd looked at Danielle the first time they met in Sanjin and called her Valkyrie without context, just her call sign, just her identity in that place where names didn't matter and credentials were written in scar tissue. She'd saved his life twice. Once in 2018 when a piece of shrapnel severed his femoral artery and she performed an emergency vascular clamp using a combat tourniquet and pure muscle memory. Again in 2019 when he'd been crushed by a Taliban RPG and she'd manually ventilated him for 7 minutes before the medevac bird arrived, her hands locked around the ambu bag, refusing to let him go. 3 months later, Rivera went into Sanjin Valley and didn't come back. The briefing had been clinical: Taliban ambush, 0600 hours, his vehicle hit by IED, he'd ordered the rest of his squad out before the secondary explosion. 23 years old. Posthumous Bronze Star. His mother never forgave the military. Emma never forgave Danielle for lying about where she'd been. The bus was 17 minutes late. Water pooled around Danielle's feet, soaking through her boots, and her phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. Emma. She declined the call. The phone buzzed again, a text from her shift supervisor at Sacred Heart, "They're terminating you." Dr. Chen said the school board complaint plus practicing outside scope. Unauthorized medical intervention. No appeal process. Final check will be mailed. I'm sorry. Another message, this one from an unknown number. This is Captain James Rivera Jr., USMC. My uncle's name was James Rivera. He served with someone named Valkyrie in Sanjin. Did you know him? Danielle set the box down on the bus shelter bench, stared at Rivera's face in the photograph, frozen at 23, forever exhausted, forever young, and began counting her breaths the way her VA therapist had taught her. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 5, 6, 7, 8. Release. The PTSD exercises. The grounding techniques. The tools people gave you when your nervous system had been rewired for survival and the civilian world felt like a foreign country. The rain tasted like Sanjin dust somehow, copper and gasoline, and the particular acrid smell of summer heat on concrete. She closed her eyes and saw Patterson's blue face overlaid with Rivera's last moment, the radio crackle, her own voice screaming for medevac, the arterial spray warm on her hands, her fingers slippery with blood she couldn't stop. She'd saved 47 lives under fire. She'd brought people back from the gates of hell. She'd earned a Navy Cross for valor that nobody knew about because she'd disappeared into the suburbs and the VA clinic and the role of just a nurse. And now she couldn't even save her daughter's graduation. The bus headlights appeared through the rain, cutting through the grey like searchlights through smoke. Yellow bus, numbered 47, moving at exactly the speed of fate. Danielle picked up the cardboard box, the mug shifted, the succulent's leaves rustled, the photograph slipped slightly in its worthless frame, and stood. The patch inside her jacket lining pressed against her ribs like an accusation. Faded 1st Marine Division emblem, sewn into the fabric 6 years ago when she decided that person, the one with the call sign and the commendations and the blood on her hands, was someone else. Someone from another life. Someone who didn't exist anymore. The bus doors opened with a hydraulic wheeze. "Savannah General," the driver asked, noting her soaked scrubs. "Yeah," Danielle said, her voice steady, the voice of a nurse with nothing left to lose. "That's right." She climbed aboard as rain hammered the roof like applause for a performance nobody had asked her to give. The bus doors hissed shut behind her, and Danielle found herself sitting in the rain-soaked dark with nothing but a cardboard box and the weight of 16 years pressing down on her shoulders. The driver didn't ask questions. Nobody ever did. She was just another person riding the 6:56 p.m. route to nowhere in particular, staring out at Savannah's wet streets while her phone buzzed with notifications she didn't read. The message from Rivera's younger brother sat in her inbox like a live round in a chamber. She knew what it meant, knew who was asking, knew the answer that lived behind her ribs like shrapnel she'd never had extracted. She didn't open it. Not yet. What she didn't know was that at Sacred Heart Hospital, Dr. Chen was already walking back her termination decision. What she didn't know was that Mr. Patterson, breathing steadily now, pink-tinged oxygen finally reaching his lungs, had woken up in recovery and asked one question before anything else: where is she? Where's the woman who saved me? And when they told him she'd been fired for saving his life, the history teacher did something that would change everything. He called the local news. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. A decorated VA clinic nurse saves a man's life at a graduation ceremony, and the school principal fires her for it. The footage was everywhere, the moment Danielle dropped to her knees, the way her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this before, the moment the tension in Mr. Patterson's chest released with an audible hiss. But the footage also showed something else, the faded patch visible for just an instant as her jacket shifted, the kind of uniform insignia that made people who knew military service sit up straighter. Comments flooded social media. People were digging. People were asking questions. The school board's phone lines melted. Parents called demanding answers. Not the wealthy parents in the imported suits, they'd quietly withdrawn their children and moved to private institutions where incidents didn't happen. But the other families, the ones who'd watched a woman in scrubs save someone's life while a man in a $3,000 suit panicked, those families wanted to know everything. By noon, the board scheduled a rescheduled ceremony. To honor our distinguished guests, the official statement read, though it didn't mention Danielle by name. It didn't have to. The entire city knew who they meant. Danielle almost didn't go. She stood in her apartment, a one-bedroom overlooking a parking lot, decorated with nothing but a single chair and a window she kept open even when it rained, and held the invitation in her hands. It was embossed, formal, exactly the kind of thing that made her skin crawl. Emma had called 3 times, then sent a text, "Mom, please come. They're making it right." Danielle had sent back one word, "Okay." It was all she had. It was enough. The auditorium was different in daylight. Smaller, somehow, though it was the same massive room where everything had fallen apart for days ago. The same polished wood floors. The same fluorescent panels humming their fluorescent song like insects trapped in amber. Danielle stood at the back, wearing clean scrubs because she didn't own anything else that fit, and she didn't let herself look at the empty principal's chair. It would stay empty. She already knew that. The board had announced it an hour before the ceremony began. That's when she saw them. 2 Marines stood at attention near the stage in dress blues so perfectly pressed they looked like they'd been folded by engineers. The medals on their chests caught the light. Both of them had the kind of posture that meant they'd held weapons in places she remembered. The younger one, a captain, she could tell by the insignia, had his eyes locked on the back doors. Waiting. She recognized the stance. She'd held that exact position 1,000 times in 1,000 forward operating bases, waiting for someone to come through a door who wasn't expected. Danielle's breath caught. She knew that face. It took her 3 seconds to place him. 3 seconds and a memory that shouldn't have still had color, a boy of 18 asking her to watch his older brother's back, a kid whose hand shook the first time he touched a rifle, a young Marine who'd hugged her before the last convoy out of Sanjin, tears streaming down his face. She'd told him, "Your brother's got me. Nobody touches him." But somebody had. 3 years ago. In a firefight in Helmand Province, in a valley where the mountains closed in like a fist, her best friend, Captain Marcus Rivera, had died with her name on his lips. And his little brother was standing 10 feet away from her, watching the doors like she might walk through them. Danielle moved. Her feet carried her toward the stage on their own, muscle memory taking over the way it always did when the body needed to go somewhere the mind wasn't ready for. The captain's eyes found hers. She watched recognition flicker across his face like a match catching. Then something else. His gaze dropped to her jacket, to the tear in the lining where she'd caught it on a fence for years ago, where the faded patch of the 1st Marine Division, the patch she'd sewn there on a night she couldn't sleep, on a night when the walls were closing in, suddenly became visible. Just barely. Just enough. The captain took a step forward. His voice came out like gravel, like something being dragged across concrete. Valkyrie. That word. That call sign. She hadn't heard anyone say it since she'd left Sanjin. She hadn't let anyone say it. She stood absolutely still, every muscle locked down, every breath controlled, the way you stand when a sniper's got you in his scope and you're waiting for the sound that means everything changes. Emma stepped forward from where she'd been standing behind the stage, and in her hands was a folder. Military issue. The kind that didn't leave official channels unless someone very high up had made a phone call. The kind with classification markings on the spine. Emma's voice shook but held steady as she read, Senior Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, United States Navy. Assignments include SEAL Team 3, Joint Special Operations Command, and Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The Marine captain's voice filled the auditorium then, rising with each word like the rotor blades of an incoming helicopter, Navy Cross. Silver Star. Another Silver Star. 3 Purple Hearts. 16 combat deployments. 47 confirmed lives saved under active fire in Sanjin Valley, Helmand Province. He paused. The silence was so thick you could operate in it. And a woman who spent 6 years trying to disappear because the weight of keeping everyone alive was going to kill her. The center aisle erupted with sound. Boots on polished wood, not running, but marching. A Marine colonel in dress blues moved down the aisle like a tank rolling through a building, every step deliberate, every movement a declaration of intent. He wore the insignia of someone who'd given orders that moved nations. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. He didn't acknowledge Sterling, who'd risen from the front row with his mouth open like a broken hinge. The colonel walked directly to the podium, took it over the way warriors take ground, and his voice came out steady and ice-cold. "Principal Sterling, your employment is terminated effective immediately. The Department of Defense has 3 elected members on this school board. We don't tolerate the public humiliation of decorated war heroes, especially those who chose a quiet life of continued service after 16 deployments. Mr. Caldwell." The colonel turned slightly, his gaze finding the school board president in the crowd. "Your phone call to Sacred Heart Hospital attempting to terminate Senior Chief Ross's employment constitutes retaliation against a protected veteran. The DoD Inspector General will be reviewing your business contracts with military families and all state contracts under your oversight." Sterling's face went white. Then red. Then gray. He opened his mouth. The colonel cut him off without raising his voice. "Sit down, sir. You've said enough." Local news cameras captured everything. The microphones caught every word. The moment Sterling's composure fractured, the moment his hand started shaking, the moment he realized that the system he'd built to protect his position had just been dismantled by people who actually knew what authority meant. He stumbled backward, his shoe caught the edge of the stage stairs, and he went down hard enough that they heard him gasp for air. Nobody moved to help him. Danielle didn't move either. She stood in the back of the auditorium in her worn scrubs, one hand on the tear in her jacket lining, and let herself breathe. Let herself feel the weight of 16 years sliding off her shoulders like a pack after a 100-mile march. The captain approached her slowly, the way you approach something wild that might bolt. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. He left a letter. Before the last op. He had me memorize it. The captain reached into his dress blues and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn. He said if anything happened to him, I should find Valkyrie and tell her, "Thank you for making me brave enough to be scared. Thank you for teaching me what honor actually costs." Danielle couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She couldn't do anything but stand there while 2 Marines in dress blues framed her like a photograph, like a moment that would stay still forever. Emma moved toward her, and when her daughter's arms came around her, Danielle finally let herself shake. Not from fear. From relief. From the sound of someone saying her name out loud, finally, after so long pretending it didn't exist. 6 months later, Emma stood in her Naval Academy dorm room and opened her mail. A letter arrived with a return address from Savannah Community College, CPR instructor M. Sterling. She opened the first line, "I wanted to apologize." Then she stopped reading. She set the letter down unopened on her desk, right beside a photograph the Marines had given her. In that photograph, her mother stood in dress blues, medals gleaming across her chest, flanked by 2 Marines in dress uniform, one of them the brother of a man her mother had saved twice, in a place where saving people meant you carried their weight forever. Emma taped the photograph to her wall where she'd see it every morning. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear scrubs. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of hidden heroes. Like if you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were standing next to. And comment, have you ever judged someone only to find out you were dead wrong? What did it feel like when you learned the truth?